Okay, well, we'll let people join a little bit slowly. I know it's the evening time and you've probably had a lot of Zoom time already. But thank you all for being here. I can introduce myself. I am Vanessa Wins. I work with Canopy as the Environmental Education Manager. I help organize programs like this, as well as K through 12 education sessions, and right now virtual lessons. And I have with me on the call a co-facilitator, a colleague of mine, Juanita, who will now introduce herself.
Thank you, Vanessa. As Vanessa mentioned, I am Juanita. I run the TOUGH program here at Canopy. Many of the students that I work with are here in the call, and we're super excited to hear what the panelists have in store for us.
Thank you, Juanita. And I will share, I know the panelists are here with us live and you can just look at them, but I am recording. Students, don't worry, I am in speaker view, so only the panelists, myself and Juanita, will be shown. But since I'm in speaker view, I'm just going to go ahead and screen share their headshots as I introduce them, and then we will segue into our questions for tonight. So let me jump into that. All right, here with us tonight to belay any fears you have about green careers are our four illustrious panelists. We have with us Dr. Jorge Ramos. He's coming to us from his virtual background of Jasper Ridge. He works as the Director of Environmental Education there. Joining us shortly will be one of Canopy's own staff members, Gabrielle Trudeau. She is also the founder of the Eulastack Natural Area Restoration and Education Project. We are also fortunate to have David Gonzalez. He is an environmental health sciences researcher, as well as a doctoral candidate at Stanford. And we have Samir Saneh, who is the executive director of Genentech Roche, as well as an environmental advocate and a recent graduate of Canopy's own adult community forestry school. So welcome to all panelists. Let me jump out of that now. And the way that this will run is that Juanita and I will be asking the first round of questions. We'll ask each panelist each of the questions that we have, and panelists will respond for about 3 to 5 minutes. We'll be in this section of it until about 7 p.m. And then at that point, we will open up to you students to ask any questions that you may have, or just make any comments that you have on things that have been shared. You're also welcome to, if questions or things pop up into your mind, use the chat box along the way. So you can add your questions in there or communicate with us throughout. So students, it'd actually be really great if you guys can also introduce yourselves in the chat box. If you just share your name, maybe your school and the grade that you're in, just so we can get to know you guys just a little bit. And as you are doing that, we will go ahead and get started. So our first question for tonight is kind of just to set the scene for everything else. Most basic question, but also tends to kind of be a very interesting one, is just, can you describe your current role or position that you're in and how you got there? So educational background, job experience, volunteer internship, all that good stuff. And Jorge, you come up first on my screen. Would you like to start us off with that question?
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you so much, Vanessa and Juanita, for this. And yeah, buenas tardes to all the students. I see all of you are introducing yourself in the chat. So I can see that some of you, you're from the area as well. So how many of you, you can like raise your hand or just put it in the chat. How many of you know where Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve is? Oh, there's one. There you go. Well, I'll share a little screen. So, there's a couple of you. Okay, good. Oh, there's Jonathan. So in case you don't know, I'll just put it on the map because I always like to put it in context. Let me see if I can share screen. There you go. So there you go. You can all see that map. So that's the Bay Area. And this is Palo Alto right here. This is the Stanford lands. And that's Jasper Ridge right there. So if we zoom in a bit more and more and more, you can start to see that the biological preserve is just 1 mile a bit south, southwest of the Stanford campus. And it's right by the Santa Cruz Mountains right here. And you can see it in my background. So as Vanessa said, I'm the associate director for environmental education there. And that's what that means is that I help coordinate that's our field station, all the educational activities at the preserve. So that includes teaching courses, that includes building outreach programs, and that includes organizing at least, we have, in a normal year, we have about 9,000 visitors, 9,000 visits of many, many educational activities. So you can imagine how busy it can get. And this is how it looks, when you put the satellite image. So we have a really unique system that allows for us to teach many different things at the preserve. So we have a lake, we have rivers, we have forests, we have grasslands, we have a lot of wildlife corridors, and we're allowed to actually teach many classes from many different fields. And if all of you are interested, I was telling them earlier, you are welcome to contact me so we can have an outdoor activity one of these days when everything is safe to practice that. So I'll stop sharing. So anyway, so that's where Jasper Ridge is. And how did I get here? Well, I'm originally from Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, which is in the northern part of Mexico. So that's, I don't know if you all know, the border city of El Paso, Texas, and Juarez. So that's where, and it's the land of maquiladoras. So we did not have the outdoors. I was not raised in this, some people have like this, like, oh, I was always hiking with my parents when I was a kid. I had cement and concrete everywhere around me. So I later found out about nature through my education. And so I did my undergrad. I was at University of Texas at El Paso, and I studied ecology there. I was like the one ecology around 100 pre-med students. And so if you are in that position, don't worry, you can still be an ecologist or an environmental scientist among pre-meds. And then I did my master's in Seattle at the University of Washington. That was the first time I moved far away from family. And Seattle was a bit of a shock because it was rainy, it was cold, and I did not know what Gore-Tex meant. I did not know what REI was. I did not know any of those things. But it was a good experience in Seattle. I did find myself looking for the sun again. So I went and got another degree, my PhD at Arizona State University. So that's, you go from like really wet Seattle, then you just like go down to 120 degrees, full sun, 365 days. And it was also closer to Mexico. It was closer to my family. And I was able to study, you can still study nature regardless of what ecosystem you're in. And I think I did a lot of my research was in climate change science. So I studied the carbon cycle. And that led me into always getting involved in how do we communicate climate change to audiences, to different audiences. So my first job, actually, after many years of school, I ended up in Washington, D.C., working with policymakers in an organization called Conservation International. And what I did there was help countries measure how much carbon they have in their ecosystem. So for example, in the US, right, we have forests and they have a lot of carbon. Deserts don't have a lot of carbon. Wetlands have a lot of carbon. And you sort of help the countries make assessments of how much carbon they have. So I did that for 3 years, and it was, it was climate science, a little bit of policy. And but the communication with policymakers was not my favorite. Let's put it that way. It's hard to communicate. For me, it was hard to communicate with policymakers. It was very formal, and it was also very around budget and economy, which is not my expertise. So I still wanted to do education, and I still wanted to do climate change science communication. And I decided to pursue this other job at Stanford, where they actually allowed me to build an education program for the younger people like you, which in the hopes that whenever you all become leaders and you all become policymakers, we won't have to try to convince you to include carbon or climate science or environmental justice in your agendas, because if we get you younger, then we hope that you will become better policymakers in the future. So, and so far, I've only been in this position for 2 years, but we're making really good changes here. We're recognizing a lot of education and outreach activities. We work with many organizations that sort of change the perspective of what the outdoors is for communities. So we're inviting more underserved or marginalized communities into Jasper Ridge, and we're teaching more inclusive practices of how to do safe practices in the field. So it's been a really good journey so far. And I welcome you at Jasper Ridge anytime it's safe and we're able to talk in person while hiking and listening to your stories of the outdoors. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. Yes, you could be the next students in the background of his next virtual Zoom someday. There you go. Jorge, I'm wondering if I can ask you one follow-up question before we hear from our other panelists. Because you have experience with getting degrees at different universities, I'm wondering if you can share what drew you specifically to the programs in the universities that you attended.
So I'm the first one in my family to actually go to college and pursue the sciences or higher education in the US. So I went to the university I went to was because it was the one next to the one that you could see outside of like your house. Well, not my house, but because I was in Juarez, but the university was in El Paso. But it was the one where you could live with your parents, and tuition was really affordable. And because I wasn't fluent in English, it was also the one that allowed me to start with ESL classes, which English as a second speaker, second language. It always changes, ESL, ESOL. I don't remember what's the new words that they use. So that was a decision that I didn't have a choice. That was the choice I had, the only one. And it wasn't until I was at that school that I learned that what is a master's degree. I didn't know what was a PhD degree. And it was mentors that told me that, oh, Jorge, if you pursue a career in the sciences in the US, there's a really good opportunity you could get funding to pursue a master's and a PhD. So there are ways to not pay for grad school if you pursue a career in the sciences, a master's or a PhD. And also at the undergrad level, when I was doing my undergrad, I applied for so much financial aid, and I also applied for scholarships. And there's also programs like the work study program that you get through FAFSA, through the financial aid office. So some of them were financial reasons, but others were, I chose programs where I knew my mentors. I knew who were going to be my mentors for long periods of time, because a master's is 2-3 years depending, and a PhD is 5 years, maybe. David is looking at me. But yeah, so it's also like, and it's also cultural, right? Like I always tell my students, yes, it's important the school that you go to for maybe 5 years for your PhD, but you also have to choose your life, because you're always going to be first a human before you're a scientist, right? So always choose also where you're going to be comfortable living for 5 years in that community, because the schools will always be there, for 30 years, 40 years. So, but your life is in the moment. So always have, and ask for help when you're making decisions that are big. Build a little committee that supports you.
Thanks for sharing that. The theme of mentorship has come up in a couple of other sessions as well. And I think it's always good to emphasize the importance of having good mentors to guide you along the way. Samir, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. Hi, my name is Samir Sane. Thank you for having me. This is the first time I'm being on a panel like this. Yeah, in terms of my current role, I work at a company called Genentech, which is part of a Roche group. We are a biopharmaceutical company, so we make medicines for diseases like cancer, different neurological diseases like multiple sclerosis, and so on. And highly impactful in terms of extending life of patients with diseases, different diseases, and as well as improving quality of life, which is equally important. So as part of this company, there is a research side which is involved in discovering medicines which will benefit patients. And then there is a manufacturing side. So I'm more on the manufacturing side. I'm a chemical engineer by training. And so really, I lead a team of scientists responsible for developing manufacturing processes to make these medicines, to take them from lab scale research to actually get them to the patients who need them, to the doctors, to healthcare providers, and so on. So highly rewarding job, and I've been with this company for 22 years now. I started right after my PhD in chemical engineering, and have been here ever since. It is a global company, so I do get to interact with colleagues all over the world, especially in Europe. There is a large base, as well as different parts of US and other countries as well, Latin America, other Asia, and so on. So that's about my current role. I lead a team of about 100 staff, and large part of my role is really people leadership. Certainly, I have a technical background, but really it's mostly about kind of motivating, inspiring people, helping them grow their capabilities and careers, and while at the same time meeting the objectives of our business as well. So how did I get here? I was born in India, so I spent first 21 years of my career there, including undergraduate education in India. One thing I've while growing up, kind of one core value that really developed in me is really be happy with limited resources, right? Simple things like, water, typically there were no showers. We would do a bath with a bucket full of water, hardly ever generated any trash. Similarly, just smaller homes, so automatically that reduced the footprint overall. Back then didn't really make a connection with the importance of that from an environmental perspective, but certainly kind of the value that you could be happy with limited resources is still something that's important to me. Yeah, after my undergraduate education, I was fortunate to get scholarship to come to US. I first came to University of Wyoming for my master's degree. That's really when I really fell in love with the nature and outdoors and really started to develop that connection. Then I went on to get my PhD in chemical engineering in Rensselaer in New York State. So yeah, this total together, as Jorge said, was what 7.5 years between master's and PhD. So it is a long haul, but really worth it looking back, and a lot of great experiences and mentors along the way. And then right after my PhD, joined Genentech as I was saying, and really grown through to multiple roles. Right, started as an engineer, kind of doing working in the lab, performing experiments, analyzing data, working in a team setting to really get projects to success. And as my experience grew and I developed a network and can people realize my capabilities, I was able to get other opportunities to in other different parts of the company, including one assignment back to India for 2 years, and then subsequently kind of my current role of leading a department of scientists. So maybe I'll pause here.
Thank you. That's all wonderful information. And I think your perspective is so rare these days in terms of longevity of staying with one company. To hear someone say that they've been with the same place, obviously not in the same role, over time that changes, but the same place for 22 years, I think maybe even unheard of for some of the students on this call, as more and more posts come out saying that, the time seems to be more curtailed now, that people of upcoming generations are spending in each position at each location. Yeah, so it's very interesting to hear the flip side, right? Of it, and it's not true for all companies, right? But it sounds like where you are at, you've had the opportunity to grow in place and to grow into different capacities.
Yeah, and especially in a larger company, right? It's you could always almost look at it. It's a bunch of different companies because it takes so many different roles, so many different types of people, so many different locations, sites to sustain these kind of organizations. And so yeah, as long as you are open to trying out different things, opportunities are there to develop and grow.
Great, that's wonderful. Thank you, Samir. David, can we switch on to you and hear a bit about your role and how you got there?
Sure. Yes, I'm a grad student. I'm finishing a PhD at the Stanford School of Earth. There's other words there too. But I'm in an interdisciplinary PhD program. I could talk about why I did that and what that's all about. Well, I'll tell you where I started. I have family roots. Actually, my grandma's from El Paso, Juarez. And I also studied ecology in my undergrad and was surrounded by pre-meds, so I can relate to Jorge in a couple ways. But I grew up in California. My dad's from LA. My mom's from Kansas City. And then they decided to raise me and my family here on the Central Coast, so a few hours south and near San Luis Obispo in a small town. So I grew up there. I enjoyed being outdoors. I was close to the beach, but I never really thought about that as a career until I had the opportunity to go on a trip with my middle school to Yosemite. It's an organization called Nature Bridge. And so that was my first time being like, wow, this is, first time in Yosemite in a national park, and just being like, wow, this is beautiful. And like, people are paid to teach people in the outdoors. That's amazing. So that kickstarted my interest in biology, which I really excited about my high school biology classes, and then wanted to study biology in my undergrad. I went to UC Davis for a few reasons, one of which is it's a great biology school. There's all kinds of really cool work going on over there. And it's also in California, not too close to home, but not too far. So I enjoyed that. And biking, Davis is a great city. So I had a great time there. I studied ecology and evolutionary biology and did research. I had the opportunity to do research. I didn't even really know what research meant when I got to college, but it sounded interesting. And there's some programs that were designed for students like me that were interested in getting an experience, but didn't really know what to do. So I did a couple programs called Research Experience for Undergraduates. There's lots of these programs around, great for students finishing their sophomore, junior years that want to go out and get experience, usually at another campus, do a self-contained project with a mentor, and kind of see what research is all about. I did a couple of those. I got to go to Maryland. I got to go to in the Chesapeake Bay. I got to go to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado and do some ecology sort of work and learn about nutrient cycling and climate change and see how it was affecting all these different ecosystems. Then I realized I didn't want to study that. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with people. That work is really important, but I wanted to work with people. And I was thinking about like all the challenges we face, thinking about how intractable they are, and decided I wanted to work with youth. I had done some education outreach work through the Arboretum at UC Davis as an undergrad, and decided to pursue that full time. So I worked as an environmental educator for a couple of years in San Mateo County. Actually, if some of you are in San Mateo County, went to San Mateo Outdoor Education up in La Honda at Camp Jones Gulch. That's where I taught. So I know many San Mateo County students go through there. So I taught there for a year. If you know Solar Steve or Marine Mark, they were my boss. And did that for a year, and then pursued some other opportunities too. That was a really fun time. But the thing was, I knew I wanted to go to grad school. My mom was like, why aren't you going to grad school? The expectation was that I would. I had the privilege of, my parents were both the first generation in their families to go to college. And they blazed a trail for me, and they wanted me to go on and pursue, postgraduate education, which I knew I wanted to do, but wanted to do some other work too. So I did that. Got to have some fun teaching 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. I got to work in the Channel Islands National Park. I got to work for Nature Bridge, the organization that gave me that experience as a middle schooler. I was on the other side of that. I was leading students, taking students camping, hiking, teaching science in the outdoors, like hanging out with endangered island foxes in the Channel Islands National Park. It was really cool. After that, I decided that I was ready to go to grad school. I wanted to study public health by that point. I wanted to look at like how changes in the environment affect health. I knew there were some justice aspects to that, but I didn't really know what that meant at the time. But I knew I wanted to get into that. What I should have done was apply for a master's of public health. I didn't know that I could get into that kind of program. I was like, well, my undergrad's in ecology. They're not going to let me in. So I'll apply to environmental science programs. I could have gotten an MPH. I didn't know that at the time, but I went the environmental science route. All worked out at the end. I got a master's at the Yale School of the Environment. So I got to move to the East Coast, which is something I was always interested in. Literally flew there, didn't know anybody in Connecticut, but found a really interesting and vibrant community, and got to live with where it snows and experience all that, and then explore environment and health and how they're connected. Sorry if you hear my dog, he will bark. So I got to do that. I wanted to do a project that would connect things I was really interested in. I wanted to serve the Latinx community, which is my roots. I wanted to study an environmental problem that wasn't getting enough attention, and I wanted to do something with health. That led me to in office hours with professors. So when you're in college, you have the opportunity to go have one-on-one or small group time with your professors called office hours. I did that with one of my professors, and she happened to have a news article open on her computer talk about mercury pollution in the Amazon basin from gold mining. I was like, that sounds like a problem in Latin America that's environmental and health related. So I had the opportunity to apply for grants to support myself to go to Peru, and I found people that could help me kind of get situated on the ground. So I could talk about that if that's of interest, but I had the opportunity to go to Peru and do a study, bring some capacity that wasn't available locally to test people, to go deploy a survey, test people for mercury, and work in partnership with the local health ministry. Did all that, had a very positive experience. I was like, hey, I think I like research. Maybe I should do a PhD. First though, I was like, I'm still not ready to do a PhD. And I didn't think I was good enough to get in. I definitely was good enough to get into PhD programs, but I thought I needed more time. So instead, I went and actually got to live in Ciudad de Mexico. So I got to move to Mexico City and live there for a year and do an exchange program with a small college called El Colegio de Mexico. and just like really experience a beautiful city and the culture and the food and connect with my cultural roots as a Mexican American. And just had a really interesting time and talk about the work that I did was related to Mercury still. Then I applied to PhD programs, applied to all the top programs and big names that I did not think I was going to get into, but I thought if I got in, I would definitely go. One of those was Stanford, got in, and it seemed to be the right place for me to go and do what I wanted to do. So that's how I got here. What I do here, basically, I'm interested in being an academic, which means being a professor, which means being more than just a teacher, depending on what you're doing. And I say just a teacher, as a former teacher, teaching is really important and very much valued. And I'm sure that you value your teachers here. I love teaching, so I want an opportunity where I could continue doing that. And I love doing research. And we could talk about what I do, and service. So that's kind of how it breaks down. I do teaching, I do research, I do service. That's what you do. If you're a professor, that's what I'm hoping to do. So for my research, I study something closer to home, how exposure to oil and gas wells in California affects public health, specifically around infants and maternal health. I study how it affects air pollution, and I study how environmental justice aspects of that, how histories and legacies of environmental racism have led to certain communities, Black, Latinx, low-income communities, to be disproportionately exposed to oil wells. It's close to home for me because I grew up in a town where there was a massive oil spill and where there were lots of oil wells and an oil refinery. So it's something closer to home for me, and an issue that I was able to go and now take some leadership on and publish papers and going to be part of policy discussions that are happening out there. So that's something that I really enjoy about my work. I teach classes on environmental justice. I've run programs to support youth from underrepresented minority backgrounds, mainly a Latinx community in my community, and just try to be someone that can be lifting up younger students and helping to working with other people to diversify science and do research. So I love what I do. I feel very privileged to be here, and happy to talk about what I do some more.
Thank you, David. I like how you walked us through the exact steps of how you got to where you are now, because something we've talked about with the students before is that it's not always this straight shot arrow to exactly what you love, and you might not even know starting out what it is that you love. And I think your point about being more qualified than you thought you were brings up two things, one of which I think it is a good idea if you feel like you need more time to take time. No one says that you have to go straight from one degree to another one. If you want experience or if you want to test something else out, by all means. But also knowing that the kind of cognitive jumps are more able than you think they are. I think this is part of my own story as well too, coming from a studio art and Spanish language background and then jumping into a master's in ethnobotany. I did not think I was going to be able to make that jump. I thought I was going to have to do a whole nother undergraduate degree or just suck it up, and continue the path I was already on. But with a couple of foundational courses over the summer, that was enough to qualify. So it's good to keep in your mind for students out there.
Yeah, and just to reflect on that a little bit, the one thing I also want to emphasize is mentorship. I've had some terrible mentors that I've taken lessons from. I've had some fantastic mentors that have helped me realize, how to make the next step. I've learned from all of them. It wasn't always easy, but that was really important and central. And then, I had a point that was reflecting exactly what you just said, and I've lost it. Maybe it'll come back to me. But I was just relating to you don't know, you think you're not good enough. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Talking to your mentors can really help with that. And moving, now I remember, whatever you're learning, it's transferable. So, what you do in college, and I know there's a ton of pressure to find a major, find the exact school that will set you up for your future. It doesn't define you. It really doesn't. It does not define you. Even what you majored in college, it's important, but it won't define you. So there's still flexibility there.
Absolutely. Very worth pointing out. Gabby, would you like to share with your current role and as well, since you're here representing EULA STAC, about your your participation with them and how you were able to found that?
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of a nice complementary story actually to how David had it, because I actually wasn't very good in high school. That's how the whole story started. I didn't really take school very seriously. So I had this teacher who was a biology teacher, and I was close to failing, but he had this site that was an old golf course that he had students come out on weekends and you could up your grade. So I started showing up. Instead of doing the homework, I was just showing up to do the work. And I started learning plants, and I started learning animals and about California and the cycles. And before I knew it, just science was slightly easier. And I went to San Jose State after that. Mainly, I went in undeclared. I was lucky, and my grandparents left me about $40,000 for college. I found out my senior year, which would have been helpful to know sooner, because I didn't have the best grades. So I went to San Jose State, which is a really good school. It's a state school, it's local. But then I started taking like the basic courses, and luckily at the time biology was all plant biology. And I took an introduction to environmental studies course. And all along this whole time, I'm still volunteering. So I just like that park. I kept going back. I'm volunteering once a month is how we do our volunteer sessions at Stack. I'm sorry, it's twice a month. The first Saturday and third Sunday of the month. We wanted to give everyone, if you have religion and you can't come on Sundays, and vice versa. So those 2 times a month, it's still what people volunteer out there. So I just kept going throughout that. And then before I knew it, plant biology was just easier. Environmental studies was easier because I was putting my hands to the plants and learning firsthand on the ground. And so that just seemed like a career that kind of just fell into like it opened up. It kind of bloomed, I would say, because it wasn't planned. I went into college undeclared and then fell in love with environmental studies. But I pursued a science career because it's a Bachelor of Arts. So I had to take extra biology and the full chemistry courses, which I liked. But again, it all fell back to just volunteering and the science teacher giving faith to all the kids, because not everyone is book smart, right? Some people learn better on the field. And so I graduated in my senior year. I actually did my internship with them, which was just doing walks at the park and running volunteer work days, which were, again, those 2 times a month. And we did workshops. We did some like plant ID workshops. We did some propagation workshops. Propagation is the word that you use to make other plants. It's make baby plants in different methods, but propagate is what we say in the plant world. So we were giving those workshops, and I was their intern. And then I actually got a job with a startup company through a college friend for 3 years, where they're an app, but I was feeding them the environmental tips. And basically once they got all their tips, they were like, well, this is all an app company, so we don't really need you anymore. So then I qualified for unemployment, and that full year, I was really happy those first months. I was like, this is nice, unemployment's nice. And then I was still volunteering with them. And then I was like, wait, I have this whole year open with a steady paycheck, essentially. So we were at the time having to go through the city of Santa Clara for anything we wanted at the park, any kind of grants, any kind of projects. And it was always waiting on them because bureaucracy is really hard and the city takes forever. And then they would always kind of fight on with us about what the work we were actually able to do and the grant they wanted to apply for. And so it was just a struggle. So they formed in 2000. Stack gathered and formed in 2000. I joined in 2004. I was a sophomore in high school. And so that year we got this book. It's called The NOLO. I was looking for it so I could like hold it up. But it's basically like form a nonprofit for dummies. Like it has a step-by-step of all the paperwork you have to do. And so we spent that year meeting twice a week in evenings for about 3 hours, just reading through that book page by page. It was me and 3 other teachers from that high school. And we just applied and took us 9 months, and we formed our own nonprofit. After that, we applied for a $106,000 grant, and we got it. We did all the work in the park for those following 3 years, and we applied for another $100,000 grant, we got that. And after that, I actually, from the nursery we would buy plants from. It's called Our City Forest, which is the nursery in San Jose. They noticed I was knowledgeable in the natives. There's not a lot of people that know California native shrubs just off the bat really thoroughly. So they offered me a job as their nursery propagator. And with essentially kind of a partnership to Ulistack, where I would collect plants from the park and then give them a discount once they're grown so we could keep growing. From there, I got certified as an arborist, which some of you might know is a trade. And that's kind of how I ended up working there for 5 years and then moved up, and now I'm at Canopy. So my role with Ulistack right now is just more or less a volunteer. I get their newsletters. I was on their board for about 4 years, but we had to meet once a month in the evenings, but I just got kind of wrapped up in my other full-time jobs and had to step back from them. But that's like the trail of how I ended up with them, and they're still active. I think for the pandemic, they stopped doing work sessions, but you can visit the park, and for now I would say it's fully restored. They tried to make it into a parking lot when the 49er Stadium was being built. And we were in that effort to deter it because we planted so many plants that provide so much housing for animals that, thank goodness, California has a law. It's called CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act. So under that, it means that if you remove biology from an area, you have to replace the same amount within that same city. So you have to find green space in that city to replace. So if you're going to do, like, say you're going to rip out 10 redwoods here, now you have to find another place within that city to plant the same amount of trees. You can't just take things out, right? And that's because we have the California Environmental Quality Act. Other states don't necessarily have that kind of protection. So we banked on that. We were saying, just keep planting, keep planting. So yes, if some biologists were to go out there and account for all the biology that's there, there's no way to find a place within Santa Clara where you can make up for that. You can mitigate that loss. So that was one thing that was saving us. And then at the very end, we had a lawyer involved who found that the city had been accepting money from Open Space Authority for that park for the past 10 years, and they would have had to return all of it if they would have used that park for other uses. So those were like our two legal battle wins that allows that park to stay and continue. And yeah, I'd say that that's my current role and how I got there.
Thank you, Gabby. Yeah, I think your story also has kind of the undertones of facing something that seems like maybe was very daunting, or you question whether you're qualified for it in terms of like just founding a nonprofit, right? That can seem like a very large prospect, but also very heartening to hear how possible it was as long as you're willing to put the work in. Awesome, thank you for sharing. So I'm looking at the time, and we spent a good amount on that question, which I think is perfectly acceptable because there's so much. You guys are all such a wealth of information and knowledge, and I think this one is always worth diving into and a deep dive. I'm going to hand it over to Juanita now, though, to take us into our next question.
Thank you, Vanessa. So the next question is, what does environmental justice mean to you? David, do you want to start us off with that question, please?
Sure. I like to take a very inclusive definition of environmental justice because I think that there are many ways in which systematic and structural oppression intersect with the environment. So in the environmental justice class that I teach, we talk about many aspects of it, including representation in environmental organizations. I think it's well known that in many environmental organizations, people from marginalized communities are underrepresented. So that is changing. So we talk about those issues, representation in the environmental field. We talk about access to the outdoors, access to national parks, access to just, any sort of green space in your backyard, in your communities where you're coming from. Like, that is an aspect of environmental justice. Gender and representation in the outdoors, and the way that the outdoors is gendered, and feelings of safety that are gendered. Like, do you feel secure being outdoors? Do you feel safe? Do you have the same access that people of other gender identities may or may not have? of course, I think what most people think of when they think about environmental justice is exposure to environmental hazards. So, you know, some people like popularly claim that the environmental justice movement began in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when there were some famous studies that came out that started to find, led by Dr. Robert Bullard, a scholar from Texas, and many others, that started to find that people from racially marginalized communities are disproportionately exposed to hazards in the environment. What do I mean by hazards? Big emitters of pollution, like factories, power plants, those kinds of things. Oil wells, like what I study. That's well known, and disproportionately, so like disproportionately high exposure to these hazards, disproportionately low exposure to benefits, things that are sustaining for communities and for health. Indigeneity and land tenure, like who owns the land that we live on and work on. Internationally, context will change because the context of systematic and structural oppression will vary by geography and by time. So yeah, so that's all the kind of, that's many different ways. I think it's not comprehensive, but that is how I tend to think of it. It is many things, and ultimately, I think it's about getting to a place where, you know, we no longer have these problems, and acknowledging that takes intentional work.
Yeah, thank you. The Tufts actually learned about Kimberly Crenshaw. I believe she was the person who coined the word intersectionality. So yeah, I think it's definitely important for all the students to recognize that environment doesn't just only mean nature. There's a whole amount of like things that also are important, such as like humans and other things. So yeah, thank you, David. Samir, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. I'm going to answer it from the lens of somebody who's in the healthcare industry, right? There is so much evidence that how some of the hazards in the environment affect the minority communities much more severely for a variety of reasons. So if you just take an example of COVID, I think you all are aware of how people of color and other minority communities have been much more severely affected. So one of the things that Genentech really passionate about is designing clinical trials. So these are the trials that we conduct in order to test our medicines' effectiveness, are making sure that they are being tested with these communities which are disproportionately affected. So there's a COVID trial specifically targeted towards that. We also have other clinical trials in the cancer area with the same objective, so that the medicines that we are developing are indeed meeting the needs of the broader community and not just the privileged community which has access which has better access to everything. So that really resonates with me, and the other thing I want to mention is also in terms of setting company goals. I think the big part of what we do is also focus on sustainability. So making sure that the company objectives are developed with the intent of not just growing profits, but really doing it in a sustainable way in harmony with nature and the society. So I think both these aspects are in tune with the kind of the general framework of environmental justice.
Yeah, I think input from different backgrounds and all ages is definitely important and needed. Gabby, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, I agree with what the other two panelists said. I guess for me, I would add for me, environmental justice is when an individual thinks they deserve like clean air and they deserve clean water and they deserve so that they are, and that they're not, I think for me, environmental justice is also people think they can do something. Like, I guess I'm leaning more because I know plants is my expertise. So I'm thinking whenever people are scared to work on landscape or to touch their own plants or to go out and be part of and do work, do physical labor to give back to nature, I think that when you do those things and you volunteer, that's where you develop this sense of like, this community deserves clean air, clean water, and that by tending to it, like planting trees and whatnot, is a way you can bring, the wealthy neighborhoods, the poor neighborhoods can all have trees. Also, environmental justice, however, because I do observe this a lot, is infrastructure, right? I know it comes to the people, but the infrastructure aspect of it is a little frustrating for me. For example, comparing Palo Alto to East Palo Alto, how they have some streets just don't have even sidewalks and they just have open park strips so they can plant large oaks, but then you go to East Palo Alto and you're just driving and you're trying to find those openings in the sidewalks because they, you can put big trees there too, and like the lack thereof. So infrastructure, better infrastructure that benefits all, I would say, would be environmental justice, and individuals thinking that they deserve the benefits from that trees and nature and water and air provide for all of us.
Yeah, thank you. The Tufts actually just finished a project on like redlining and all that. So I think you definitely like touched on it really well. So thank you. Jorge, do you want to wrap up this question?
Yeah, actually, for me, I think environmental justice, I see it as my inspiration and my motivation to be an advocate for change, because I'm a trained scientist, so I have tools and knowledge that can help push for better policies and push for to transform those barriers that were put in the past, and they're still in the present, to transform it into some more inclusion practices. So, and it's something that I think in my family we didn't know, because it was all urban, so we thought that was normal. But it wasn't until actually in the US when I moved for college, it was a Latino community that they like pushed me to protesting, and it was we like stopped a college football game one day because our university was allowing us. I mean, I think it's all like cleared up now. If not, they'll probably send me a letter. But they were letting us play on contaminated soils in the university. It was lead. It was all polluted with lead because we were next to a refinery. And we found out that our soils were polluted. So we made like protests, and I was on the streets protesting, and I think my mom got a call from my aunt one day and was like, your son is like, tu hijo está en la calle, he's not in school. But then we changed it, right? Then the university acknowledged the change, and we did, things changed. So I see environmental justice as like David said, as the goal, that these injustices shouldn't exist. But I also see it as like my path to be a better advocate, to use that lens to explain the injustices of today and how can we change them tomorrow. So, and I recommend this book by a fellow Latino. Oh, Michael Mendez. Let me see if I can turn off where is it? Now you can see my background now, but like, this is the book. I just got it a week ago. So as you can see, my pen is on page number 4, but I think it's going to be a great book. I have not read more of it, but it's from what I started, it looks great.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes it's up to the students to make that change. I know it's super hard being like a young student, but having a team, I think definitely makes it a bit easier. I don't know if many of you are or know the story of Ramic here in East Palo Alto, but a group of youth helped stop Ramic. They were a waste like company here in East Palo Alto, and they weren't abiding by the laws. And a couple of years back, they were able to shut them down. So yeah, I definitely think that youth empowerment is very important. Vanessa, I'll let you continue.
Thank you, Juanita. Yeah, that's always a great question. I think every panelist has a different angle based on their work, and it just goes to show that if you work in any environmental career, you are working, I mean, fingers crossed, but your work should have something to do with environmental justice. Because like you pointed out, Juanita, it's not in isolation, right? There's not the environment and then people, there's repercussions. So thank you all for that. Our next question is a evaluation question. And it's basically the intersection of your values and your company's values. So twofold question, if you can explain the organization or company that you work with, what their values, goals, missions are, and then how your own personal values relate to that. Let's start with Samir, if you would like to lead us off with that question.
Sure. Yeah, one of the missions that our company recently rolled out was bringing 3 to 5 times more benefit to patients with half the cost to society. And over the next 10 years. So recognize that the cost of medicines is a big part of the healthcare costs, and part of it is because it's needed to fund the innovation that's needed to bring these medicines, but at the same time, the company recognizes that the healthcare costs are not sustainable. So it's how can we do it with much lower burden on the society and increasing access to all cross sections of the society. This is part of our mission, and that's something that really resonates with me and my values, right? That healthcare being essential to each and every individual, and how can we really someone's access or a socioeconomic background doesn't become a barrier for that. And the company is willing to do our part, and that really resonates with me. And the second piece is what we were touching upon earlier. Really, it's doing it in a sustainable way, so not and really make that as part of the objectives of the company when it comes to the overall carbon footprint, water usage, other energy usage. Those are kind of baked into our 5 and 10 year objectives or the goals of the company. And the company is willing to make trade-offs in order to kind of deliver on those promises and not just build business around the profit. So not every company is doing that. So I do think so. These are the two things that resonate with me.
Thank you, Samir. And I see very much how the current sustainability efforts of your organization would tie into, as well as the earlier story that you shared of just being cognizant of resource use growing up as well. I think that's, we do it to an individual scale when we're cognizant of it, and it can be very fulfilling when you have the ability to be part of a larger organization that also has it on their radar. It feels like your impact is larger then. Gabby, could you answer that question for us, please?
Yeah, sure. So UNAREP is the name of our nonprofit, but Eula Stack Natural Area is the name of the park. I'm mentioning that because UNAREP stands for Utilized Natural Area Restoration and Education Project. So if I don't think, I don't know if any of you know, but restoration is typically when you restore a site or when you study it, they typically want to make it what it was there historically. That's usually the goal. It's like, what did this look like before? However, because it was an old golf course, 40 acres, we want, the values we have is we want to provide habitat for California native species, right? And with that, we want to invite people to go to the park and appreciate it. So we've actually chosen 5 areas of that park to do 5 different California ecosystems. So it's a restoration and education project because we want people to gain appreciation for nature and the California, and and simultaneously provide habitat for birds and bugs and any other shelter that those animals wouldn't have if they didn't have these 40 acres within the city, right? For example, there was some night cameras got put on the river, and well, there was quail in the area for the first time in 50 years. They even stayed and had their babies. They had 12. That was a fun year. We followed the babies around. We got fox dens built at the park. So that's how safe the place were. And then we also, the night cameras caught beavers, which hadn't been in the area for more than 50 years as well. So yes, we weren't restoring historically, but we were just planting and planting and planting and keeping things in their ecosystem with the hope that some of this would come back in some of these restorations. So that would be our value. And then the goals are to kind of maintain that. And then another thing we have that I think makes us a unique nonprofit is nobody gets paid. All of the money and the fundraising goes directly back into the park. It's for hoses and plants. Mainly it's to buy more plants, wheelbarrows and tools and such. So there's no CEO, and we all meet voluntarily. So that's why I could jump out as easily as I jumped in. And we all respect each other's time, and we all, that's the agreement is you're here because you want to hear. You're here at the park because you want to be here. You help because you want to help. And that's our mission. And I think I'm pretty proud to say we're going to probably continue that way. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I would think quite rare actually to have nature as such the focal point, that, and people that are so dedicated that all of the funds go directly to a twofold mission, it sounds like, one of which is to offer a human experience and like to offer people these great outdoor experiences that then will form like an outdoor connection for them, hopefully, and predispose them to being more inclined to be environmental stewards. But then also, like you're saying, preserving wildlife whose habitat is declining steadily as we overdevelop things.
Vanessa, I have to add one more thing, and I would get a slap on the wrist if I didn't. So the Utilized Natural Area, the name Utilized is an Ohlone word. So we are in contact with the coyote. So we have, what was it, the Muwekma are the native tribe of this area. So Ohlone is just a word that means coastal people. So it encompasses a lot of the tribes. And so there's about 3 tribes. So the Muwekma also have utilized this space and have gotten involved with us because that's their territory. But it's also, when you speak of Native American cultures, they've trained us to say that it's they have to speak on what they believe and what they say. I don't necessarily speak up for them, but I just wanted to say that it's also a space created and kind of like returned to them so they can use it as much as they want for ceremonies or visiting. And so yeah, the park wouldn't be complete if they weren't part of this mission as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And it goes back to the earlier points on environmental justice, because of course we are all sitting on unceded lands from American Indians and Ohlone. And if you're calling in from other areas around the Bay and around the United States, it's the same story. So that's wonderful to point out. Thank you for doing that. David, would you be kind enough to answer that question for us as well?
Sure. So universities, there's an aspirational mission. There's the kind of lived experience, and then there's the vision for, I think, what it could and should be. So the aspiration is that, and if you read the mission statements of, I think, most universities, to create knowledge, it's to educate, it's to, train leaders and, promote civic engagement, do work of benefit to society. I think that's accomplished through many different ways, depending on, your field of interest and you know, where you decide to like put your energies, the experience is different. You know, many of these institutions were not built for everyone. They were built for specific people at specific times. And in some ways, and you talked about redlining, and that's a historic policy from the 30s. It led to long-term harm that persists to this day. I'm studying how redlining affects, you know, from the 30s affects the siting of environmental hazards today. So I think we know that these institutionally structural legacies from our past persist. I think that holds in universities too, where if you look at the representation of universities, it doesn't match the aspiration. It's not there yet. But it can be. And I think that's sort of where I find some purpose in staying in these places, is because I appreciate the vision of creating knowledge, trying to like, for me in my case, like producing knowledge that can help us understand how, you know, things in the environment, oil wells, wildfire smoke, gold mining, putting in a new warehouse, putting in a new power, like all these different things. Understanding how that impacts health so that we can design policies to protect communities. I think that's a really, that I feel very, very lucky to have the opportunity to do that. So I think it does check all those boxes. But it's also incumbent on us to build the universities, and I think really all these institutions that really are inclusive and really are equitable and really are righting these historic wrongs, like you all have been learning about.
You raise a good point that, I mean, especially working with a group as large as Stanford, or maybe when you get to larger organizations, there is kind of this overarching umbrella, maybe somewhat idealistic goal, which has different iterations depending on the departments, but it's very gratifying to hear people who have internalized it personally, and knowing that if it comes out in people's personal work, then it is being carried along. Jorge, I know you stepped away from a call. Are you back with us? Are you able to answer this question? He had a personal
yeah, my sister called, and it's rare when you know, when your families call at a different of the routine, you're like, oh, what's going on?
Yeah,
but
what's wrong?
Yeah, it was all good. Yeah, so we at Jasper Ridge, we are affiliated with Stanford, but because we're also a field station, and I liked how Gabby mentioned that we actually are also on the Moek Maoloni territory. And actually the Moek Maoloni, they lived at Jasper Ridge and back in the day, and they still have access to it, and they have their annual ceremonies, and we continue to collaborate with them. And they actually helped us write the land acknowledgement that we actually teach our docents and our students to mention in at any tour that we give at Jasper Ridge. So in the overall, the mission of Jasper Ridge is in 3 pillars. It's we base our work on research, education, and conservation. And that's with the purpose of managing a landscape that we have that serves those 3 purposes. And really, just about 2 years ago, we actually even included a pledge that reads, to be safe and welcoming space for discovery, discussion, and community for people of all cultures and identities. And the more we grow in how to actually make a safe and authentic space for education and science, we're also adding more levels of protection and safety guidelines and clear ways of reporting any, you know, unsafe or risky behaviors from anyone, because we want to make Jasper Ridge a safe space for everyone, especially people and identities that have not been welcomed in the outdoor spaces. So I have to present on that tomorrow, and so it's a good it's one of the other, and what I've learned, and I'll finish with that, is that we should always just be really good at listening and taking feedback. And nothing is ever set in stone. we always are always learning. I've been on panels with David before, and every time I hear him talk, I'm like, oh, I just learned something new. So, you and from all of the other panel members, and so thank you also. I think learning is a really good value through listening. So
Absolutely agreed. I have found it so fascinating getting to moderate these and hear what all of you guys are sharing. I mean, 2 hours is honestly, it's a long time to be seated. I feel like I get the jitters, but it's always fascinating and I always want to hear more while not seated. But thank you guys for answering that question. I'm keeping an eye on the time. It's around 6:42-ish right now. So I think we're probably gonna have one last question, which Juanita will ask, and then we'll open it up to students. And if students don't have questions, we have a couple of backups that we're curious to hear about. So Juanita, would you like to ask the next question?
Yeah, so for the next question, you can choose one of the two. So what advice do you have for someone who is about to graduate and start a career in your field? Or what advice do you have for someone who is trying to break the narrative of green fields being white-centric? Gabby, would you like to start us off?
Sure, and I have, so is it okay if I give a little bit on each? It won't be long.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. So advice for someone graduating, volunteer. If you aren't strapped for cash, because obviously we all need to eat, volunteer at things you like, because that opened a lot of doors for me. Just volunteering, that's actually how I got most of the jobs I have, is just getting along with people in a volunteer situation. That's how I met Elise. And then you just keep in touch. You never know what doors are going to open. So just creating those kind of connections. And when you go for it, you want to do something, it says a lot about a person when you're showing up to just give back. So that would be one for a graduate. Then the second question for breaking the narrative of the environmental fields being white-centric. I would say just, I guess my point was, again, just, how people don't think they can cook until they're in the kitchen and they try, and then you just keep trying, and eventually you can cook. I want to give that same advice for anybody who thinks environmental careers are white-centric, and it's like, no, just try it. If you're interested in it, just try it. So just, go outside. Don't be scared to work with plants. Don't be scared to experiment. Don't be scared to fail when you try new things. Yeah, that would be my two advices. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think the not being afraid to fail or like try new things, I think it's something that everyone can relate to. I myself can relate to. I never imagined myself being a part of Canopy since I don't have any sort of environment. Like I majored in Chicano studies. So yeah, I definitely think that just like putting yourself out there is definitely a good thing. Thank you, Gabby. Samir, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah. A couple of things, right? One reflection I have is, career is a long journey. So it's not something you need to look for like a quick win, or it's just being very open to different options and course corrections. So just going to be open to that, because you may run into branches which may not, you might find that it's not for you, and you may want to try something else, and it's perfectly okay. Coming to specifically to kind of the industry that I am in, yeah, certainly kind of advanced degree, if you're interested, it's really beneficial in getting into healthcare industry. That advanced knowledge is really puts you in a good spot in terms of a starting point, and it's almost expected. Then, once you start working, I mean, my big thing is it's really important to build that trust and credibility with your colleagues and peers. because once you have that foundation of trust with your colleagues, that's really going to open up many possibilities for you. So um, so just keeping that in mind. So taking responsibility for your decisions and really delivering on what you commit can really help you in the long run, because you, if you're not careful about it, unfortunately, at least in a given company, if you're intending to stay long term, that can really hurt your chances over time. And then the last piece I want to highlight is just the focus on learning. Right? It's every experience, kind of small changes you can make with the intent of learning and expanding your knowledge base, your skill set. It's really and building a broad foundation can really help you create different possibilities for yourself in advancing your career. So yeah, those are some reflections I want to share.
Yeah, thank you, Samir. I think many times people think of learning as the more like school setting, but I feel like you can learn anywhere. You can learn from your parents, your friends, and even like just being outdoors in the real world. So yeah, I definitely agree on your like learning point. I lost track of who needs to go next. Was it Jorge? I think. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, in terms of advice, I like get a group of friends together and apply for college together and set deadlines together. I applied for all my degrees. We didn't have iPhones when I was your age. I had a flip phone. I don't know if you all remember the flip phone. It was really cool. You could like snap it and like hang up on someone. And but it was just like on speakerphone, and all of us, we would be writing our applications. We would all be like submitting. We didn't have Zoom. We would hit submit at the same time. We would like, all of us had the same fears of moving far away or not, or how we're gonna pay, or so it was always, I'm a big fan of never doing anything alone. I'm always a big fan of just building your own little friendship group and committee of friends and your own advisory board. I mean, that's, but like that's because that way you find other resources and you support each other, and that's and the other one is yeah, it is still very white centric. I'm not gonna like rosy it. Like I mean, environmental organizations is still the top leader positions, senior positions of many environmental organizations internationally and nationally. They're still, but you find those little mentors, not little, I mean, you find one or two mentors in some organizations that either look or sound like you, or they're just really good, authentic allies. And be kind and be respectful and be, I think that's something that Samir said really well, like make sure you, one of the advices that I got once is like, make sure you deliver what you promised. And if you can on time, that's the best thing. But I think, find those really good mentors in these spaces that might not be, the most comfortable ones, but as soon as you're in, remember, again, you're not alone, right? Then you can start to bring in your fellow members. Then you can start to bring in your friends. Then you can start to bring in your, I mean, even I worked with an organization called Latino Outdoors, where it's like about hiking and going outdoors, but we actually promote that you bring in your family, that you bring in your culture with you. Because that way you also build then a safe space for you. Don't wait for someone sometimes to build a space for you. Sometimes you have to build it a bit, but don't do it alone. Now you've met many of us here. ping us or email me. I don't want to put everyone else on the spot, but like, we can always be supportive of your mission, and the landscape is changing. So I think you'll find more mentors as you continue in the path of your careers, and always just be true to yourself. If you want to say hola in a very high dominated space, say hola. If you want to say buenos dias, say buenos dias. Don't always be you, and that always helps.
Yeah, I think being authentic and transparent in places that are very dominant might feel a little uneasy and uncomfortable. But just like you mentioned, just having a support group and just keeping in mind that you being there is opening the doors for many others to come and like after. So yeah, I definitely agree. David, would you like to wrap us up?
Yeah, I just want to like second what the other panelists said, and especially that piece on building community and finding people to support you. Because speaking at least for myself, there were times when the imposter syndrome kicks in, where that feeling that like, oh, like I don't belong here. Like they don't know that I don't belong here. I just snuck in. That feeling comes in, and that's always there for many people. That's something that you should, that you can get help with. And one of those ways to get help with is to build that community of support, or, especially people from marginalized backgrounds or holding, identities that are marginalized. You're going to hear things. Microaggressions, racial microaggressions, gender microaggressions, like these, intersectional things, where you're going to need people where you can be like, yeah, that was crazy. Like that thing happened, and that's wild that happened. I have people that I do that with, and it's really important for just staying sane and being like, yeah, that was wild. I mean, hopefully you already have that, and I'm sure that's a skill that you've certainly developed in early in life. But keep that up and build those networks, and find those mentors and people, build trust, find people you trust, like all that kind of stuff. The other thing is for diversifying, for people coming from, I'm forgetting the wording of the question. It was about for someone trying to break the narrative of greenfields being white centric. They are not white centric, but we are led to believe that they are, and white people hold the power, but they are not white centric. The history is long here, and it didn't start with John Muir, and it didn't start with David Thoreau. So I admire those individuals. The history started long before. I mean, think about the deep indigenous knowledge of the three sisters, for example, corn, beans, and I'm forgetting the other one, squash. That is a knowledge of ecology, of ecosystems, knowing that we need the beans to replenish the nutrients, the nitrogen in the soil, so we can grow the other crops. Like that is a deep environmental knowledge and sustainability, that knowledge that was developed for a long time. There's leaders from communities of color. I think about, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, like these leaders of the Chicanx movement that fought for workers' rights and agricultural spaces, but also that's environmental justice right there. They don't get talked about the same way that many of our other leaders get talked about, like Rachel Carson, these people. Again, I admire Rachel Carson, but there's more to the stories. Even today, like the problems that we're facing as a state, wildfire management, the Yurok tribe in Northern California are leaders in wildfire management using historical, their traditional processes for managing landscapes, managing fires. That's knowledge that, that is beautiful, and that is something that should not be sidelined, and that is coming from a different tradition than, this Western science. And then there's other, fantastic examples of leadership happening too, like here in the Bay Area, the Sogorea Land Trust, which is an urban indigenous female-led land trust based out of the East Bay where I live. I partnered with them before, and their whole mission is to, like, in their terms, rematriate the land, so bring the land back under tribal control, and they ask people to donate and support those movements. So the leaders are there. It's always been there. It's never been white led, but it's been white dominated. It's never been male led, it's been male dominated. And that's a narrative, that's power, We can fight that by occupying these spaces, by shifting the narratives and telling ourselves that we belong. And really, it's harmful for everyone. The exclusion of people with knowledge, the exclusion of people that belong, that are qualified, that have a lot to bring, that have a lot to offer, hurts us all. It hurts all of us. Racism hurts everybody. Sexism hurts everybody. We belong in these places, and we need these voices. These ideas are needed. So I like to think imposter syndrome. The imposter is the institution to give us a sense that we don't belong. That's the real imposter. So you belong. You're needed. Find your community. Happy to be a contact for that too. I know we're not done yet, but we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely
Good
agree.
see. Oh yeah, go for it.
Oh, no.
I was gonna say, I learn something new every time I'm with David. I tell you, it's so always open up your ears for listening. Thanks, David, for that.
Likewise, I always learn from so many people, even the people I don't want to learn from. You learn from them.
Vanessa, I will give it back to you.
Thank you all for your responses on that. And thank you for those who have brought up that they'd be willing to be contacts, stressing to the students that, maybe this is the start of your kind of professional network or your thoughts about green careers, but this is a great place to start. And we'll have a time at the very end where I'll ask any panelists who are willing to share out whatever contact information you'd be willing to share out. And then we'll also share it out with the students afterwards. So thank you for offering that up front. That's great to know. We're just about 7 o'clock, which is perfect timing to open it up to students. Be brave, be bold. You can unmute yourselves if you'd like to ask out your questions, or if you'd like to put them in the chat, we can ask them of the panelists on your behalf. So I'll go radio quiet for a little while to see if there's any questions out there. Well, I don't see anything coming up yet, which could just be because your answers were so thorough and informative that the students are simply left without any questions. In which case, we have a couple of backup questions. I'll ask one of them, and then I'll check in with students again to see whether any more questions have popped up. I will not. I rescind that former statement because it looks like I just got a direct question from a student who wants to know, what is some of the favorite parts of your careers? This looks like it's for all panelists. And I'm so glad you asked that. That was one of our backup questions. So let's go ahead and start with Samir. Do you have thoughts on that question?
Favorite parts of career? Yeah, I have to say, really developing people, right? Teaching, and the framework we use is called the 4 C's. So it's about helping people develop their capabilities. So that's one of the C's. Helping people develop connections. We talked about the community building earlier today. Third is recognizing people's contributions in order to celebrate their success and use that as a reinforcement to help people grow through those experiences. And then the 4th C is use all these aspects to help individuals through their career journey. So that's the 4th C. So yeah, that I would say is the favorite part of my role, helping people through these 4 C's.
Thank you. It definitely sounds like a service focus, which is close to your own personal values. Gabby, do you have some thoughts on favorite parts of your career?
Yeah, I would say there's two aspects of my career that I love the most. One is that when you work with plants all day, I guess I got into them because they actually don't talk back. So I can have bad days with them and good days with them. And when I finish working on a tree or a plant, it looks good. It just makes me feel good. So there's a lot of, what's that word, like satisfaction in tending and caring for plants, because you see them grow and thrive and you see your efforts, right? So there's a visual reward. And also that the whole, if you're an introvert, it's kind of nice. You just sometimes can work and don't have to talk very much with the plants. But however, to kind of on a counterpoint, whenever I have instructed someone on how to care for their plant or shown them how to care for something, and then I see them do it by themselves or even tell someone else how to do it, that's another really rewarding aspect of my job, when I'm like, wow, I just empowered them. Now they want to go and take care of those plants by themselves, and they think they can do it, which they can't. So, because all of us can work with plants, like we're all connected to them. Plants, we call it a science, but at the end of the day, all science is you make observations over and over again over something. So pick a plant and watch it every day and you'll become the scientist on it, you know. So make observations, pull it out of the ground, feel it, the texture, smell it. So those two aspects, that plants don't talk back, and that people learn what I show them and then they do it and they continue to teach others and themselves with that knowledge.
And that also brings up a good point about checking in with your own personality and skill set in your own job search. Like if you recognize that you are more introverted, we live in a mostly extroverted world, and this could be another example of, maybe just to add to David's list, of there's certain things that are out there in the world as predominant, and they're the standards, but you don't have to adapt to them or change these like intrinsic pieces of you in order to best fit into what is served to you. So if you are more introspective, there's something for you. And if you are, you know, any of, basically there's room for everyone, whether or not that's what's put on the big screen or whether or not that's what's spoken about, it does exist. So thank you, Gabby. David, would you like to share some thoughts about the favorite parts of your career?
Yeah, I think like Samir said, I really enjoy working with younger students. It's something that like makes me feel kind of reflect on like how, you know, what I've learned and, you know, what I'm able to give, and just, and also what I learned from students too, because it, you know, mentoring is reciprocal. So I'm always, you know, learning things from students that I'm working with. And it's exciting to see their trajectories and support, you know, students. So that's one reason I really enjoy, you know, going to science. And the other thing is, and this is a bit of a privilege depending where you're at, but getting to choose what I work on is really nice. You know, within reason, I have mentors that I work with, and I need to convince them that what I want to work on, you know, is worth working on. But I get to come to them with my ideas, like, hey, I think this is a question that we should look at. They're like, great, go look at it. It's cool. It's cool to like have that flexibility.
That is really great, and that's not present in everybody's position, so it's nice that you have that. Jorge, do you have some favorite thoughts of your career that you are willing to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, just like Samir and David, and I think Gabby also mentioned that I work with students. So I work with everything from K through 12 to college. And my students also include senior citizens, senior members of our community. So I get to see in every person, doesn't matter age or background, like when they start to learn by picking up soil, when they start to learn by touching in the outdoors, when they start to learn that nature is also a classroom. That's like it's like my aha moment for them, because I believe that, you know, if people care for the environment, they'll protect it. And so I am in a position where I can open up a space for education. So that's like my favorite part of my career right now. Sadly, it's all been on Zoom lately, but I try to make it, virtual tours. I try my best to put the live bird sounds sometimes. So yeah, so working with you all, and you all are hopefully coming to Jasper Ridge soon. You're on my list.
I don't see how they couldn't with these enticing Zoom backgrounds and the promise of real life bird song. Can you imagine? We have some questions coming directly to me and also just out into the chat. So if I can ask them in order, maybe we can do that. There was a question specifically for Gabby. Can you explain or clarify how you found out about EULA Stack? Was it through email, a relative, or how was the opportunity presented to you?
Yeah, I think I just fell into this because I was going to a high school in the city of Santa Clara, and the high school teacher was the one that started. And he's great. His name is Dennis Dowling. And he started about 5 nature centers, including the El Viso one. So this guy's just been a very strong environmentalist in the area. And I just got lucky that he was my teacher and I was failing his class. And he said, well, if you want to make your grade better, come out and volunteer. So that's why I was saying, you never know where volunteering or just showing up to do something will lead you to do. So that's why I'm saying, like, if you guys like something, maybe you have a job or whatever, but if you just like something, just go volunteer with them, maybe do a couple unpaid internships. You'll just learn what you like that way. And that's kind of how my whole thing started, right? So.
I'm a huge planner, and part of me, when I hear these stories of like, kind of like happenstance, or like it just happened, like David, when you're sharing too, that you walked in and there was like an article that just happened to be all of your interests synthesized together. Part of me is like, it just feels like this trick of the universe where I'm like, like I respect and I recognize all the students asking these questions of like, well, how did it come together? And I also so many times hear the stories of like, well, it just did, like somebody handed me an opportunity. There was an article. I actually found the program that I did, my master's program. My mom walked up to me after a flight, brought me an in-flight magazine, and it talked about an ethnobotanist who was doing work with indigenous populations to protect public health. And I was like, that would be amazing. So it's like equal parts hilarious, but equal parts frustrating for like the planners that you can't always plan it. But thanks for answering that, Gabby. Erin has asked our next question. It looks like it's for all panelists. What do you believe was the most important factor in getting you to where you are today? Looking at the time, if for asking for all panelists, maybe if you spend like between 2 and 3 minutes tops answering this one, because we've got 1, potentially 2 more. So I'll give you a second to think about that. Do you guys just want to jump in? I don't know who's most prepared since these are kind of extemporaneous. You're welcome to just unmute yourselves when you have an answer and jump in.
I can jump in. The question is referring to what? Can you repeat it again though, really quick? I had the answer.
Yeah. What do you believe was the most important factor in getting you to where you are today? Some factors were listed out: education, connections, experience, etc.
Yeah, I would say more just not being afraid to fail. I tried a lot of things that no one else wanted to do and just kind of kept persisting, communicated openly when I had struggles. Didn't expect to be perfect. I just wanted to do a good job. So that opened a lot of doors. Just being the one that's like, okay, I'll try it. So yeah.
I think for me, it's kind of wanting to step outside my comfort zone. Like I mentioned, I worked at the Smithsonian Institute after my sophomore year of college. I flew across the country to Maryland for the first time on the East Coast ever. And just had this opportunity. I felt good about the opportunity, but I was kind of intimidated by it. That's usually a really good combination. Like, hey, this sounds really cool, but I don't know. As long as it is something cool, and maybe check with your friends and mentors, like, hey, this is good, right? Don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone. I think that is something that has served me well. And also saying yes. I think listening to myself. I mean, I've said yes to a lot of opportunities in grad school, for example, that my mentors sometimes told me not to do. Like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Do this instead. But I knew for myself, like, no, I want to do this. I think this is important. I think it's something that I want to do. And I'm glad that I did, because it's saying yes to some things that I knew I wanted to do has led to like just kind of building more community and more opportunities down the road.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing that David said. The other thing I want to add is really, when you see an opportunity, seize it and give your 100%, right? It's, you know, kind of focus on what you can control, and as long as you're giving your best, regardless of the outcome, I know one will be satisfied. That's the approach I took, and really benefited from it. Really focus on what you can control and give your best.
And I'll just mention, poor Erin, they're gonna be like, all of the answers are gonna like, there's not one answer to answer everything, but so the connections and networks are actually very important too. Like, I'm still in touch, and I still say thanks to my undergrad mentors from 2002. So it's been 20 years since I've worked with them, and they wrote my first letters of recommendation when no one would write one because you don't have any experience. So the first people that wrote the rec letter to help me get into a program, they're still my friends. And now I'm a colleague. Now I write proposals with them. So treat people with respect and kindness, and maintain that network of support. And you know, I ended up introducing them to my family because my only friends were professors in undergrad. I was that kid that I guess I was just too nerdy. So even after I left, my professors hang out with my parents now, and like they go to New Year's events without me. And so just have your yeah, keep your connections. Don't see your connections just using them. Foster your network and foster your connections as well. The good ones, right? But like David said, you also learn from the bad mentors. Write things that you should not do, and then write things that are good. So.
On that note, that just reminds me of the teacher that I started Duelistech, which it took a while for him to ask me to stop calling him Mr. Dowling. He's like, I'm Dennis. We're peers now. And so that took a while. And so, yeah, now he's my friend, and we call each other, and he invites me to holiday parties. And yeah, so he's my friend Dennis now.
And it's such a good reminder too that your networks and your connections aren't just leverage to get you from like to ping pong you from like one job to a different opportunity. Like they're if done correctly, and if they're like very meaningful people, they can last. I mean, you can form a personal connection with them, and they also serve for me as well as like a fountain of inspiration. There's a lot of heavy topics that come up working in the environmental field, and sometimes it can, your inspiration can wane a little bit, or things can feel intractable or like too difficult. And these are the times when it's so important to have people around you that you can tap, to commiserate, to know how they deal with it, just to talk things out and know that someone else is there for you and experiencing something similar.
Yeah, the wins are few and far between in the environmental field. So I think celebrating the little ones, just like want to second that, and then community.
Yeah, and a community that lifts each other up as opposed to like this competitive world that we live in. It's not like everyone's not cutting each other down for the same job. Form a community that has your back and will be there for your wins and your losses, right? It's just as important to talk those out. Great advice. Thank you all for your input on that one. There was another question that is also for all panelists, and I think is going to form a really nice counterpoint to an earlier question about favorite parts of your career, which is, what is the least favorite part of your career? Maybe just list some challenges. We like to all think our dream job is just going to be hanging out outdoors in the soil all the time, but I'm sure I'm not going to say paperwork. It could be the favorite part of your career, but just any least favorite parts that you guys are willing to share, and we'll do it the same way. Just unmute as you're ready to share.
we can go in the same order. Some days are long with working with plants and digging and shoveling. You're going to be dirty. The sun beats on you. And sometimes things don't work out. You have to run around. So some days are hard like that. But at the same time, if you remember to have fun during those days and people have learned something that day, that's where it makes it rewarding. But I would say that nobody got to anywhere they're proud of without working hard. So that's what I'm always reminded of. And like, I have some contemporaries that inspire me, like Steph Curry and Kendrick Lamar and Rihanna, because we were all born the same year. So I always think like, you know, everyone that's anywhere that they're proud of, they worked hard. So sometimes you're putting in extra hours, sometimes you're doing extra events, you're reading more, you're staying up late, but it does pay off. So.
Well, it's hard. It's an interesting question, and I think it really varies. I think for researchers, because the job means so many things. Like it means like writing grants to support your work, and like, you know, collecting data, going out to the field, or like typing up code on a computer. Like if it's just writing, like all that. There's so many aspects to it. I think the least favorite part for me is like navigating the politics of it. And that really takes some skill. And again, mentorship and community, say that over and over again. But yeah, the politics can be really difficult. And by that, I mean, you know, maybe writing a paper and like you feel really good about something, but you send it in the way I'm sure you know, or you may know, sending in papers to a journal to get published and peer reviewed, and like you get your peer review back, and like someone says something. There's just a lot of like interpersonal stuff that I think can get uncomfortable really quick. I think there's ways to prevent that from happening, but some of it's inevitable, and sometimes it can be really challenging to navigate around that.
One of my grandpa's favorite jokes was, politics comes from the Latin poly meaning many and ticks meaning blood-sucking animals.
That's a great grandpa joke.
I know.
It's true. I didn't even make it up.
I'm going to use it at Jasper Ridge. We have tick sometimes, and I'll see if I can slide it in sometimes.
Oh, please do.
With credit.
Yeah, one thing, you know, every job has not fun part, right? And I think we just have to have a mindset that you just suck it up and do it. You know, as long as majority of your job is fun, it's all good. What things that I find frustrating is, you know, we spend a lot of time in meetings, and just poorly run meetings in terms of kind of driving conversations in the right direction, not honestly listening to each other. You know, those are the kind of things that really frustrates me. We spend a lot of time in meetings, and at least in my world, and not having effective ways to make those happen is not good.
Like right now, I'm very fortunate to have a really good job with mostly all positive. There's a bit of politics, but actually the hard part for me, because I moved to California right before the pandemic, and I haven't seen my family in more than a year now. So like when you move away from family, and I was raised with like 30, I mean, yeah, so many cousins. So, and you know, and the grandma, like you get together every Sunday with la abuelita, and I think sometimes our jobs makes us move, or we choose to move to pursue that. So I think it's always good to, you know, make yourself aware of what choices you make and try to mitigate distance, for example, you know, if you have the means. So like now I have the means to like fly my parents to visit me and show them a new part of the world that they've never seen. So but yeah, so I think sometimes, again, like David has also mentioned, and many of you all mentioned community, right? And community can also mean family. So don't sacrifice those really top of the list values that you have for maybe the best job. And if you have to sacrifice some things, find ways to mitigate it. And if you're a bit lost, just ask your mentors how they did it. And we might be able to help you brainstorm with that. So
that's a helpful advice, especially, as in the US, I think it's more common to go across the entire US or to change states simply for a job opportunity. And it's good to be reminded that you don't always need to be chasing that, or that even that the job with like the perfect description that's not in the perfect place is not the perfect job for you. If you're hoping to stay in a certain location or closer to family, friends, inbuilt networks, that's important. We're close to ending, but there's one more great question that's specifically for David. So I'm wondering, David, if you could take just a minute or two to answer this final question, and then we'll wrap up. Could you just share, somebody wants to know what the typical day of an environmental health researcher looks like. Could you just walk us through your day?
Yeah, and I can like generalize that just for grad students in general. And I know like other panelists are qualified to answer that question as well, because I think it really varies. And at least for me, it like depends on, first of all, like the questions that you're working on. I think the field of environmental science, environmental health, epidemiology, is very diverse in terms of like the kind of questions people are asking. Some people are doing deeply involved community work and going into communities and building relationships, and that's a big thing. Making connections, collecting samples, surveys, like that kind of thing. That could be a part of the job, but that's a small part of it. A lot of your job is also, some days I'm like, right, well, let me tell you about today. I woke up, I took my dog for a walk, and then well, it's pandemic, so I'm working from home. So I had a call with a younger student who wanted some advice because he's interested in similar things to me. So I heard talk with him about his study and shared some things that I've learned over the years. Then I worked on the paper I'm writing right now, and I did some revising and editing. That's typical because grad students write a lot. You're going to write as part of the job. And then I had a meeting with my lab group, and was just listening to some of my peers. So lab group is, you work with a professor, there's other students and researchers in the group. They're all doing different things. So we come together and people will share what they're working on. So I got to hear what other students are working on and say like, hey, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that? Because science is a team sport, we gain a lot from like sharing and learning from other people. Then I just had some other Zoom calls, and then I had this, and I got to talk with younger students, and it was great. So some days I'm writing a lot of code and like analyzing data. Some days I'm out in the field doing interviews with people. So it kind of varies, but during the pandemic, I've just been at home all the time because I have that privilege.
Thank you for that. It's helpful to know the concrete asks of your day, I think, in helping to see if that's a good fit for others. And thank you, students, for all of those great questions. Those were all really fantastic for that last half hour. We will wrap up now. So a huge heartfelt thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your stories, for sharing your advice, and for taking time with us tonight. If you are willing to put in any contact information, maybe just adding it to the chat would be great for students to be able to talk with you afterwards. And I think I speak for all of us when I say, you're sharing amongst yourselves that you learned so much. I feel like we have learned so much from you. And I would hope that certain students feel as inspired as I do walking away from this. So just a huge thank you to you again.